What's up, students? Welcome to a primary source walkthrough, this time for Cosmas Indicopleustes, or Cosmas the Indian Voyager, a selection from his book, longer work, called Christian Topography. This comes from about 550 CE, so this is a little bit further in the course than we are in some of the other areas, and there's a couple reasons for this. We kind of condense things in the pre-modern Africa chapter because there's still a lot of work to be done on pre-modern Africa, and that work is starting to accumulate, but there's not a lot there that we've really been able to condense down into textbook form. There's lots of really interesting work, but we're still kind of figuring out how to tell that story in a way that doesn't get down rabbit holes for a survey level course. There's really good scholarship that's working on this, but for now, this is kind of where we're at. And it bears out, like if you go to Barnes & Noble or you peruse Amazon and you're looking at African history, you're going to see a lot of stuff from the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. But prior to the 18th century, there's not nearly as much. And there's a number of ideological reasons for this. There's a lot of academic reasons for this. It's an area where there's growth needed. So when we look at Cosmas, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get whatever picture we can of pre-modern Africa. And in particular, we're looking right at this area, right in what in Europe we would call the beginning of the Middle Ages. And we're trying to figure out what are these cultures like. And what this primary source does is it gives us a sense of what people from Axum, or modern day Ethiopia, were like. Now, we know a couple things about Axum. Axum is a significant kingdom in North Africa. They trade with an absolute panoply of people. So there are people who they trade with that are from the modern nation of Yemen. They're in all of that North African area. We know that the Axumites have connections a bit further south, those sorts of things too. So what Cosmas is doing is he's looking at Axum and he's telling us a little bit about what it was like for them to engage in trade, what they're trading, who they're trading with, all that sorts of stuff. And I know trade isn't always the most exciting thing to learn about in history. It's one of those things that I've struggled with to really kind of come to like reading about or talking about, and I get it. But a lot of times this is where we get the most description because this is where people are coming into contact. So a couple things before we jump into the 3 or 4 big pieces of information that we can pull out from this source. So number one, this part right here is the introduction to the source. So this is just kind of telling you who Cosmas was, giving you a sense of the whole layout of the primary source. It's not the primary source itself. So if you are thinking about using this for an essay or whatever, this part is not the part that you want to focus on. It's from here down that you want to focus. Couple things. Number one, we know that he's a wide traveler. I mean, if his name gets India Voyager in there, then he's a pretty well-traveled person. The other thing that I just wanted to point out, that it notes that he's a flat earther, meaning that he believes that the earth was flat. This is not a common belief. This makes him really unique. There's probably a handful of people like him who believe that the earth is flat, but the Greeks had figured out that the world was round. The Romans had figured out the world was round, and most knowledgeable Christians believed that the world was round. The flat earth thing is not a very common belief at all. So this is not something I want you to focus on. Like, don't use Cosmas as evidence that people thought that the world was flat. He's obviously wrong, number one, and number two, he's not representative of the majority of people here. So let's jump into the source itself and let's see what it tells us. Now, the first thing that he does is he gives us a sense of the region that he's talking about, and he tells us a little bit about what they're trading. So frankincense is a aromatic. I don't particularly like the way that it smells, but it's used in a lot of perfumery. And it comes from this part of the world. It's also in the Middle East, considerably too. I mean, remember, if you've read your gospel and you know the story of Jesus's birth, the Persian men, the wise men, the Magi brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So yeah, it's no wonder that Cosmas wants to point out frankincense. It's also a luxury item. Again, I don't think it smells particularly good, but a lot of people like it. He also tells us a little bit about where the Ethiopians go. They go to Barbaria, which I assume is the a kind of unincorporated lands of the area surrounding Ethiopia. But this is clearly a pejorative. Barbaria is where the barbarians live. He refers to them as natives and all this sorts of stuff. So it's fascinating to see that appear here. They also go and they visit Yemen, India, and Persia. He refers to Yemen as the Homerites, and I haven't really been able to figure out why he refers to them as the Homerites. But that's something to consider. There may be some connection with the Homeric epic here, something like that, like the Iliad, the Odyssey. I'm not sure what exactly he's on about. Now, he goes on and he's trying to situate the importance of the Ethiopians within the Bible. And this is important. I mean, this whole book that he's calling it is Christian topography. So when he is making these connections to biblical texts, like, he's trying to situate the geography and everything else within the context of the Bible. And so he's going to point out a couple of places where these people appear in the Bible as to, kind of rope them into this tradition. So the first thing he notices is the Queen of Sheba, and she's from Yemen, but she comes into Axum, and this is mentioned in the Book of Kings and in the Gospels, and he references Matthew 12:42 down here at the bottom. So the one thing you have to remember with Ethiopia is that there's this long tradition of connection between Ethiopians and some figures of the Christian Old Testament, or the Jewish Bible. And that is, there's King Solomon the Wise, you've hopefully heard of him, and he marries the Queen of Sheba, who is mentioned here. Now, in Ethiopian tradition, kind of mythology, they have a son. That son goes out of Aksum, and he goes to find his father Solomon in Israel, because that's where Solomon's from. And so Solomon greets his son, and they talk for a while, and he's headed back. And along the way, the son takes the Ark of the Covenant with the Ten Commandments, and he takes it back to Ethiopia. This is found in a text called the Keber Nagast, or at least the story is. It's a big part of the Ethiopian tradition. Again, we talked about this in a live stream session one time. Whether or not this is true depends entirely on who you are, but it's a sticky sort of situation. Anyway, so from this first page, we get a sense of what's being traded. We also get a sense of how these people connect to the Christian tradition. Again, this is titled Christian Topography. There's going to be some attempt, wherever it can be made, to connect people into that biblical tradition, that biblical history. So if we turn the page, we get into more of a description about what the process of trading is. And this gives us a couple of clues into what the Aksumites are like. So what he says here is that the Aksumites, every other year, they go into Barbaria. They go into these native lands, okay, these non-Aksumite lands, but these people who have lots of gold. And the Aksumites bring with them oxen, salt, and iron. And they link up with a whole bunch of other traders, and they go and they make this camp, and there's a bit of exchange. So number one, we learn quite a bit about what the Aksumites are willing to trade. That is oxen, salt, and iron. And let's be clear, salt and iron are big deals. Oxen is too. I mean, meat is a big deal. But more important than meat in terms of the ancient and medieval world, especially the ancient world, are salt and iron. These are just fundamental parts of the human experience. And there's so much that you can do with salt, whether it's cooking, preserving, all sorts of stuff. Salt is so key. And if you ever want to read a whole book about salt, there's a book called Salt by Mark Kurlansky that'll tell you everything that you ever wanted to know about salt. In any case, so they take these things, they go to the camp, they build this camp, and this trading process starts. So the Aksumites lay out the oxen meat, the salt, and iron. And then the natives come. And the natives bring gold. And the way that the source describes it, they describe the gold in nuggets like peas called tanchards. And what happens is the native approaches the oxen, salt, and iron and puts down the gold and leaves it there. So then the Aksumites or the other traders come in and they look, and if they're satisfied with the deal, they take the gold, and then the native comes back and takes the goods, the oxen, the salt, the iron. So the two people engaged in this trading don't actually talk to each other. It's this process of observing what is presented and seeing if they can come to an accord and like, okay, that looks like enough gold for this meat and salt and iron, and if it's not, then the Aksumite walks away and the native can add more gold, or take the gold back and just say, no, the deal's off. So that's a really interesting way of doing business. Now it tells us something, and Cosmas has some commentary on this. And one of the things that he says is that the Aksumite language is very difficult to understand, and not a lot of people understand at all. In fact, he says interpreters are hardly to be found. So this is the way that they've worked out this trading, because that direct communication isn't possible. And you know, we can make some interesting conclusions or interesting theories from this. It could be that the Aksumites just don't want to deal with the natives at all. Like, they just don't want to talk to them. They think they're better than them, whatever. They just want the gold, and that's it. It may be something like that. It's hard to tell. But that would be how I would interpret it. It's just like there's the practical side of things. Well, we don't have a way to communicate, so this is the way that we've figured out how to do our business without having to learn each other's languages. But the lack of contact, okay, I'm going to go put my goods down, and then I'm going to leave. And then you're going to come and put your gold down, and then you're going to leave. And then I'm going to come back, and I'm going to decide whether or not I accept your deal. And if I do, I'm taking your gold and walking away, and we're never going to meet. Like, that seems to suggest that there needs to be a feeling of social separation here, rather than just, you know, having this take place face to face. You can take that as you will. And I apologize for my dog's barking. I think the mailman is dropping something off. In any case, so we can conclude that. We can conclude a little bit about the need to feel safe. There's the it talks about on the way back how the Aksumites are worried about being robbed because they're carrying so much gold, that they go very quickly, so as to avoid any potential bandits, and then also don't want to be overtaken by winter or rains. And then Cosmas ends the primary source by talking about the weather. So chew on these questions at the end. That helped me understand the source a little bit as I read through it, and tried to pick out, you know, what are the key takeaways from this source. So we talked a little bit about how Cosmas characterized the Aksumites. We've seen some of the comparisons, and I got you started thinking about why Cosmas alludes to the Old and New Testament accounts in his analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this walkthrough here. Hopefully this helps you understand what Cosmas is on about if you were having some trouble with it. And then I also hope that it gets you started thinking about the way that this source can help us understand some African culture, though through the lens of an outsider. I want to make that point before we end, is that this is through the lens of an outsider. This is not an Aksumite explaining this process. It's Cosmas's own observations. So we have to kind of take that in with a grain of salt. So if you have any questions about Cosmas, any questions about Northeast Africa around 500 CE, feel free to reach out to me, leave a comment, reach me in an email. Don't forget to like, comment, and maybe give a subscription to the channel, because history is important for everybody, and y'all should read more about it and learn more about it, and that's what I'm here to do. So I'll see you all in the next video. Take care of yourselves. See you next time.